proteins can denature, and denaturation is the irreversible, often permanent change in the structure, in other words, in the conformation and function of a protein due to high temperature, heat, and extremes of pH. In other words, when you denature a protein, you break it so it doesn't work anymore. And you change two things. You change its shape, and if it loses its shape, then it's also not able to work anymore. That's essentially relatively straightforward. And there are two ways how you can do that. You can basically heat up the protein, then you break it, or you can have extremes of pH. So if you put it into a very acidic or very basic environment, it can also denature. And basically, what heat does is it causes the molecules, including the protein itself, to vibrate more, and this breaks the intramolecular bonds, for example, the hydrogen bonds, which stabilize the protein, and therefore the protein refolds and it takes on a different conformation. So you have to imagine that proteins are not static, but they're kind of vibrating. They're a little bit, how shall I say, they're vibrating along. And if you make them vibrate too much because of heat, then you can essentially end up breaking the bonds, and then the protein refolds and it doesn't work anymore. And extreme pH also, of course, causes a refolding, but essentially it does this in a different way. The amino acids, which make up the proteins, they change their charge. And this also breaks certain bonds, and therefore they also lose the conformation and also the function. And essentially you have to know the definition for denaturation. And essentially this is the reason why when you, for example, heat proteins, then essentially they become cooked and they change their shape and also their appearance. And I would like to show this to you by actually having a little video which I made. So what I have a frying pan over here, and what I'm doing right now is I'm now basically pouring some egg into it, and essentially I'm heating the egg. And what do you notice? The egg protein starts to denature. Well, it starts to turn white, and that is basically a denaturation process. And you probably already also realized by now that it is not possible to uncook an egg. So once the egg protein has denatured, it stays denatured. There is no possibility to undenature it anymore because it's irreversible. Yeah, so I'm basically making my breakfast here. Okay. You still see that, yeah, and okay, what is this over here? This is basically also egg white, and I'm adding over here some alcohol. This is alcohol. Okay, so I added some pure alcohol, and you also see it immediately changed the color to white. So the alcohol also causes a denaturing, yeah, and basically without heat. Okay, so this is cold. At room temperature. You still do not want to eat this, okay? I mean, this really tastes horrible. And it's also not healthy because of the high concentration of alcohol. And as a matter of fact, you wouldn't be able to stand it because it's really going to burn your lips. And they added some really disgusting stuff to the alcohol so that people are not able to drink it. So it actually makes it tastes very, very bitter. But I hope you get the point that alcohol is also able to denature it. Now, alcohol is, how shall I say, does not change the pH. Okay, alcohol is not a change in pH, and it's not heat. And this is now a citric acid, which is used for cooking. And it's pretty sour. It's a citric acid powder, crystallized, and I dissolved it in water, of course. And you still see in the center some undissolved citric acid, so the pH is quite low. And now I'm pouring the citric acid into the egg white. And you can also see that essentially it starts to turn white because the protein also starts to denature. Maybe not quite as strong as in the alcohol, so maybe the acid is not strong enough. But you still see that there is a discoloration, it changes to white. So this one is also denaturing. I was not quite happy, so I decided to actually pour some citric acid directly into it to see if I can increase the effect. Yeah, and yeah, it works a little bit. Okay. So forget about the alcohol part. For you have to know that heat and pH are able to denature proteins. heat and pH are able to denature proteins. If you basically cool the egg down and if you freeze it, it does not denature. It's going to stay raw. It's going to stay clear. But once you've heated it up, essentially it's irreversible. And this not only happens with eggs, of course, but with any protein. Specifically sensitive are enzymes. Enzymes are proteins which speed up chemical reactions. And these enzymes, if you basically make it too warm, essentially, they break and they denature. And this is also the reason why cooking destroys bacteria. Because essentially what you're doing is you're denaturing the enzymes of the bacteria, and this kills them off. So that was basically it, okay? So you have to know the definition of denaturation, and you have to understand that heat and pH, extremes of pH, extreme pHs basically denature the proteins. Some proteins are more heat resistant than others. So, for example, bacteria which grow in hot springs in the bottom of the ocean, in volcanic areas, of course, they are more heat stable. They have more heat stable proteins than bacteria who do not live there. But our proteins our proteins as human beings, if we have fever above 40 degrees, 41 degrees, we have a problem already. Okay, so that's basically how temperature sensitive some of our own enzymes and proteins are. Okay, so this was it.